get started, then I'm going to do intros. I'm just going to mute you, Joey,
Yeah.
so that it's my face that appears. Okay. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon's session. Thanks for coming on this beautiful sunny day. Can everybody see me? Can somebody sort of like thumbs up if you can see me, or can we all just see Joey stretching? You can see me. Okay, great. I can only see you, Joey. Right, fab. So I'm Sarah. Can you mute yourself, Casey? Sorry. Can everybody mute themselves, in fact, until the question and answer bit? Thank you. Right, so I'm Sarah from Social Farms and Gardens, and for those of you that might not know us, a lot of you I can see I recognise names are members or involved in a community orchard that we know about, but there's quite a lot of people here that I don't know. So Social Farms and Gardens is a community growing charity across the UK, and I'm the North Wales representative. Today, heddiw dyn ni'n mynd i cario ymlaen yn Saesneg, ond os rhywun yn eisiau gofyn cwestiynau yn Gymraeg, feel free to ask questions in Welsh if you want to, but the session is going to be predominantly in English. So the Community Orchard Forum, we haven't had one for about a year. As a charity, we're really keen on community orchards. We support all kinds of community growing projects. Orchards obviously are fantastic because they're brilliant habitat. They're also a priority habitat because a lot of traditional orchards have been lost, and they produce a large amount of fresh organic food for communities with relatively few inputs in comparison to, say, a community garden. So we're really keen on community orchards. In 2020, we had an Orchards for Wales programme funded by Welsh Government, and we funded 57 new orchard sites. And then under our Resilient Green Spaces programme, we funded a further 1,146 fruit trees across Wales, across 24 community orchards. We also provided about 60k worth of storage, processing and training, storage and processing kit and training, because our second orchard programme was all about making community orchards be sustainable and productive. So what are you going to do with all that fruit? How are you going to process it? How are you going to store it? How are you going to get it out to the community? That's what that was all about, programme. We are in the process of applying to the Heritage Lottery for a further orchard programme, which will be more skills development based. So we're partnering with the Orchard Project. We're hoping to get their community orcharding course available to people throughout Wales, so that you can have like orchard leaders who really know their stuff based in each community orchard. So that'd be great. It'd be primarily based around heritage orchards. So it'll be maintaining and restoring orchards. And of course, those skills will be transferable to people's own community orchards. So the project the RGS project included an orchard forum, and we've decided to carry it on because it's really helpful just to have that continuity. It's a space to learn from each other and to build a network of community orchards across Wales, and to support orchards to be, productive and healthy through supporting people that are on the ground involved with them. So this session is on summer pruning. We're going to have a presentation from Joey from Merched Perllan, about 20 minutes, and then there's going to be questions. So if you think of a question while Joey's talking, if you could just put it in the chat, then we'll go through those questions one by one when he's finished. But then when we are doing the questions bit, you're welcome to just use the hands up function, and we'll make sure that we get to everybody. And then you can talk about issues that you've got with your own orchards, and it just becomes a little bit of a sharing session for the last 15 minutes, and we'll finish at 5. The next session will be in September, and that will be about running full days and other orchard events. And we're going to be producing a template that you can use for running your own community orchard event. In terms of resources, let's see, on our website, you can find quite a lot of resources. I'll just share my screen. Where is it? Oh, I'll share it later. It's disappeared. But we have got a really nice little booklet that we had reprinted during the last orchard programme, which is like an introduction to orchard management. And it's a really handy little booklet that you can give out to new volunteers. So it's not it's not really in depth, but it gives everybody the basics. So if you've got any new volunteers, that's a great thing to share with them, and I'll share that on the screen later so that you can find it in your own time. Right, that's me. I'm going to hand over to Joey. If you want to unmute yourself, Joey, and I'll mute myself, and then you should turn up in the screen.
Am I muted now? Oh, now I can't hear you though, Sarah.
I've just muted myself so that you're the person that shows up in the screen.
Oh,
do you see what I mean?
okay, I get you.
Yeah.
People have got that setting. Okay, welcome to today's session. I mean, we're going to be limited about what we can cover in 20 minutes. So I think today is a really reminder of some of the basics. Hopefully that's not teaching you all to suck eggs, and because you're all experts, I'm sure. But I think really these kind of forums are really important to share what's going on in our own orchards. If we're looking at insect decline and things like that, it's useful stuff to share, or if particular varieties are now becoming more or less susceptible to disease. That's also really important. Sarah mentioned heritage, although she didn't explain what she meant by that. As well as running Mechad Perllan, Orchard Daughters, I also am a director of Wales Heritage Orchards, which is the plan over the future years is also to look at heritage orchards in Wales. We've got an interesting definition of what we define as Welsh, which I hope you like, which is effectively 3 definitions of what we were trying to Welsh heritage orchard. One, firstly, that's something that's born and bred in Wales and always been here. Secondly, something that's been here so long we thought it was Welsh. We've even given it a Welsh name. There's a couple of good examples of that. Gwethna Meal being one. And then thirdly, things that, well, they've been here 2 minutes, but we don't care. They do so well in Wales. We're having them. We're going to adopt them. So if they do well, they thrive well. I don't mind if they're from Scandinavia or Switzerland. We'll incorporate those as our third definition. That's quite a broad definition of heritage. Sometimes wish we would adopt the same policy with people. So, okay. Where are we with summer pruning? It's really important to think about what's going on with your orchard year, because summer pruning is only one facet of that. You should have done your winter pruning. Winter pruning is all about effectively skeleton and shape, and summer pruning is effectively all about fruit, all about the fruit. And 2 aspects to that, really. One, making sure that current fruit that's already hanging on your trees ripens nicely. You're really ensuring airflow, and you're also ensuring lots of sunshine on the existing fruit. So you're making sure that this year's ripens. We've got pings going on in the background, hoping that's people joining rather than the flurry of questions. So it's all about the fruit. So what's winter then? Yes, skeleton stuff. And it is, I'm going to jump back to that, even though we are in the summer, because we've launched, this forum is launching at an odd time in a way. Normally the perfect time would be the winter. But you often get pictures like this, my prop number 1, Sarah. And if you look at this in a 2D diagram, which it generally is in most books, you get this kind of thing with main lateral branches across the main stem or trunk, and then you'll have sublaterals or laterals against them and sublaterals. Now, this makes very little sense in 2D, which is why I've never understood why they don't bother to make the extra little thing of showing you what it should look like upside down. I can see that now. Because what you're trying to do is these branches in the diagrams in the books look like they're on top of each other. They're not, and they shouldn't be. You're also, when you're choosing your branches in formative pruning, and this is one of the problems with pruning books, most of them get formative pruning and regulative pruning, i.e. pruning something to shape initially from a small tree, and then when they're older, and then you're making sure they maintain that shape later on. They merge the two. And it's important for you guys to not merge the two, because they're quite different. When you're creating your shape, which we can go into this in, well, I won't go into too much detail on this, but I just want you to get this in your head, because the shape is really quite important, because you will be filling your 3D space. Yeah, everyone get that? Everyone nod. Go on. Yeah, I understand that. Yeah, good. Okay. So in the summer, this is covered in leaves, which makes it very difficult to see. And there are two types of summer pruning I spend a lot of time doing. One of them is what I've already outlined, which is stripping out a lot of the new growth. And I'll come to what I do about that in a minute. And the other one is I'm actually acting on a decision I made in the winter, which is why I also reference that. Because very often with older trees, the congestion at the top, you might have a real nesty, probably easy with the white here, isn't it? You might have a really nesty area at the top here. It won't be because, well, it won't be solved by climbing up the tree and getting yourself stuck in here with secateurs. 9 times out of 10, it will be solved by tracing things back lower down, and you'd be removing something lower down. The old-fashioned climbing of that you see in old photographs doesn't tend to happen in modern orcharding these days. We tend to sort it out by following it back. However, you can't make a decision like that in the summer because you can't see what's going on. So in the winter, you will have decided, perhaps you're even just lowering the crown. You might be reducing the height of a tree. So you could either be reducing the height of a tree or taking out a significant branch that's causing congestion. This is one aspect, it's an anomaly to summer pruning that I'm going to cover first, because I think it's worth flagging up and you very rarely see it. We will identify this in the winter. Why? Because we can see what's going on. We will label it with some fancy ribbon. I always use red. I probably should use blue as an Everton fan, but I do use red because it's easy to find in the undergrowth or overgrowth. And then I will find this in the summer, round about nowish, usually into early August, and I'll come to that as well. Timing is quite important. I will identify it and I'll take it out with my saw. I've got one here as a nice prop with a proper pruning saw. This is not the one I use. This is actually the one I use to get out to demonstrate why we always buy silkies and not anything else. This is a Felco. They make a good effort, but there's a reason why we all use silky saws, because they're the better. Making those big pruning cuts in a crown lowering that we do in the summer, you will use a proper pruning saw. They're nearly, well, they're Japanese, nearly all the good makes, and they cut on the pull. It's important to remember. And they are the only thing that we would use to make those cuts, generally speaking, unless it was so thick that we needed a chainsaw. Even then, I tend to use larger silkies. What we never do, if the branch is applicable, is use one of these. Never use secateurs for pruning cuts. Always use them for what? Well, why are they in your tool bag, Mr. Hughes? I hear you cry. Well, I use them for taking the weight off trees. If I'm going to be making a pruning cut, very often you can get a grip of it better if you've taken the weight off it first. But always the final cut with this. While we're on the subject of tools, more props. Oh, more people coming in. Here's good secateurs. I always use Okatsuna. I think Monty Don uses Newaki. I think Ian, if you know Ian Sturrock, he uses the cheapest secateurs he could find or steals someone else's because he's from a different school of thought. There's 2 schools of thought secateurs. You either buy cheap ones and keep them super sharp because you're going to lose them, which is Ian's theory, and that's good. My school of thought is I call it the bicycle school of thought for secateurs. If you buy a really good bicycle, you're likely to go cycling and look after it. I find it the same with secateurs. If you buy really good ones, I'm so precious about them. I'm always got an eye on where they are. Unless someone's going to nick them, obviously. So these are about 40 quid, and cheap ones might be 20 quid. So I don't think it's that big a step, but keep them sharp. If you do go for the Okatsunas, I don't work for them. They don't give me any money. I just like them. They do come with a nice sharpening stone, which is beveled. Keeping it sharp is really important. And also cleaning between trees. If you're spotting disease as you're pruning, whether summer or winter, you don't want to be spreading it around. Right. So anything else on tools? No, I'm short of time. So summer pruning, if we're not doing a crown lowering, identified in the winter, or removing a major branch, there's a question to you really. Why would I move a major branch like that in the summer? Why wouldn't I just take it out in the winter? Anyone want to jump in with unmute themselves? No one going to go for it? You must know, Sarah.
If you get water shoots, if you do it in the winter.
It is
sometimes.
about sap pressure. Yeah.
Right.
If I take out a really big branch, if I take out a really, oh, sorry, was someone going to come in then? No. If I take out a really big branch in the winter, when the sap is down, I'm going to get a sap pressure reaction. It's a bit like if I remove my arm. Well, if I drain all the blood out of my body and then remove my arm and then put the same blood back in, there's going to be a hell of a lot of blood pressure because this is quite a large limb that I've removed. And there isn't enough space anymore because I've removed the arm since the blood was drained. It's a little bit like that. It's a nice way of thinking about it when you're pruning large limbs like that, which is why we counterintuitively do it in the summer. We label it in the winter because we can see what the hell is going on, but then we remove it in the summer. We label it. We can find the label, obviously. The rest of summer pruning, as we reminded ourselves at the beginning, is all about getting sunshine and airflow around existing fruit and making new fruit for next year. So really, if you're following a fancy, there are textbooks on it, and in fact, you could. Well, I'm not going to get a copy of the modified Lorette system if you want to do that. But you'll never, if you get too much into that, particularly for teaching community groups, you'll never prune. And in fact, even for sort of semi-professional people, they just think, oh God, because there's too much counting involved. The RHS did a decent book on pruning. Well, they attempted one, but their dedicated fruit pruning book is actually not as good as the standard RHS book. Still to this day, it's quite good. So if you are wanting to sort of gen up on some of the technical stuff, I'd recommend you get this one. They RHS do a dedicated fruit one, but the details aren't as good as this one. So a little top tip on books. What I always tell, particularly community volunteers, is if you're, first of all, timing is really important. Apples and pears, particularly when we are summer pruning established trees, why won't we be pruning very young trees in the summer? The sap. Anyone want to jump in? No? Because the sap is powering our growth. So we tend with young trees, so that's years 1 to 4, sometimes 5. We are mostly pruning in winter to attain that shape. But when we get an established tree or a tree that's already filling the space required, often referred to as restricted forms, like a fan or a cordon of some kind, you're then going to have to be mostly summer pruning. And the reason why we do that in the summer is because we actually want to steal sap. We don't need its power. We're robbing it of growth effectively, because what we want to do is control shape and get sunshine and airflow around existing fruit. If you get into the modified Lorette system, you will probably be a bit obsessed by buds and growth. But really, the only take home for most people is, if you're going to get rid of it, then you can get rid of it completely. If it's a long, vigorous shoot, it's worth leaving some very long, vigorous shoots for your timing, because they can actually draw some of the sap and away from where you've made cuts. The reason why we tend to wait for summer pruning of apples and pears, more or less, I don't even look at them until August, and yet some books you do see them suggesting pruning in July. If you prune too early, you're actually better off summer pruning almost too late with apples and pears than too early. If you prune too early before the base of the new growth, we've got another prop for that, before the base of any new growth, which will have leaves at the time, actually. This is not apple, this is a bit hazel from outside. When the base is becoming woody and firm, lignified, we would say, technically, we probably want to be starting to thinking about pruning. If we go summer pruning, if we go too early, we tend to get a secondary regrowth, which will never lignify and gets hit by the frosts. So you're much better being too late with summer pruning. So this is all this fleshy young growth that you're removing from your either established tree or restricted form in the large, and you're taking a lot of it out. Where do you cut? Well, I don't want you to get obsessed about too much of the system. My top recommendation, if you remember nothing else about today, is, well, 2 things. Timing, better off being a bit late than too early. And the only time I ever encourage people to count is this. And I tend to look for either the second or third bud, although you often referred to it as leaf, because obviously these buds are going to have leaves. The second or third one, whichever is the more favourable, generally speaking. If you've got 2 or if bud 2 or 3 or leaf node 2 or 3, if 2 or 3 is better pointing downwards, I will go for that one. A downward facing bud, we will hope to encourage it to fatten up into a fruiting bud the following year. So if you're going to remove fleshy growth, why not make new fruit at the same time? So buds 2 to 3, whichever's the better, really. Probably statistically, you're better off, and in some advice, you go for buds 1 or 2. The problem with buds 1 and 2 is, although it probably is slightly more likely to fatten up into a fruiting bud, it hangs a little bit too close to the branch structure, so it tends to rub. So my recommendation is that you actually go for something a little bit further away. Go for quite likely rather than very likely. That's plenty good enough, especially with a mature tree where you're going to have tons of fruit. And remember, you're going to be thinning it. You would have thinned your fruit probably at some point earlier on in the summer. But the summer pruning now is all about producing new growth, but timing it well. We haven't mentioned plums and cherries and things like that. Plums and cherries, the only time, we haven't got much time now, the only time we tend to prune existing trees, established trees. And that's because of an endemic disease in the UK called silverleaf. That means that we are desperate to avoid that, and we tend to prune them in, well, around about late July here. I sometimes go a bit earlier than that. You will, though, and it'll be the first question usually people ask me when I'm training is, oh, well, I read yesterday that you prune plums and cherries in the spring or the late spring. Well, unfortunately, the books never make the distinction, again, between formative and established pruning. For formative pruning, we do take a chance, and like a lot of these things, often written as, pardon me, black and white, it's grey. We're always playing a balance of risks. If you understand the science, what's going on, you're playing a balance of risks. We know that there's still silverleaf round in that part of early, it's kind of almost, it is spring really, for young plums, first 4 years. But we take a gamble because we want to capitalize on some of that rising sap to get that shape that we want. But as soon as they're 4 or 5 year old, your plums and your cherries, we tend to even avoid pruning them if we don't have to. And actually, what we'll do is it'll be almost like a if you're familiar with the structure of winter pruning, you always take out dead, anything diseased or damaged, and then only then dodgy stuff. And by dodgy, I mean crossing branches, things that are rubbing, all that kind of stuff. But do the other stuff first. You would do that as part of your winter prune, of course, with apples and pears. You don't have that opportunity with your stone fruit once they're established. So you've got to try and do that first. So the first thing I would do with it, if you're looking at plums or cherries, is you would actually do that standard dead, diseased, damaged, all the kind of things first. Then look at cutting back some of your fleshy new growth. Even then, because they're naturally congested trees, plums, if it's not too bad, we'll often leave it because there's still a little bit of silver leaf around. But if you're going to think about young plums and cherries, better to think when you see spring mentioned for the youngsters. Well, they don't always make that distinction about them being youngsters, but that's what we are dealing with. I'd rather you thought of it as we're extending our definition of the summer into spring, because if you just maintain summer in your head for stone fruit, you won't go wrong. That's probably the whistle-stop tour of summer pruning to an extent, other than to say, if you fancy it, one of the things I tend to do is try to time some of my summer pruning with bud grafting. Now, I know that Sarah hasn't asked me to talk about that today, but it is worth mentioning because when you're taking all that lovely, thick, fleshy growth, I mean, I know you just drop it on the floor, but how awesome would it be if you actually then made new trees out of it? And what I tend to do is I'll combine the two if I can, because you can, although traditionally bud grafting is kind of mid-July, you can extend it into August, which is when you'd be doing your summer pruning. Just 2 tips to throw out on bud grafting. If you want to do it, this is going to be the quickest bud grafting lesson you've ever had in your life, is as soon as you take it, you probably want to be starting to think about grafting the bud, because it starts to lose moisture almost immediately. So what we do is we remove all the leaves, but not the petioles, so that we leave little stalky things and it looks rather ugly. And we'll probably, these are like good 6-inch lengths. Then we'll have something like this. And we may well have a rootstock that we planted because if you bought a load of rootstocks in the previous year, anything you didn't use through bench grafting, traditional grafting, you may well have potted. That would be a very sensible thing to do because that gives you scope to do something in the summer. And you'll have had a rootstock that looked a bit like that, like basically a dormant stick. You planted it, and then it'll have lots of leaves on it. It'll be a little tree. Then you can come along, and what you're doing effectively is moving one bud from your known variety onto your rootstock. And it's really simple. First of all, removing the leaves stops the transpiration, keeps it moist. I normally have a bag, leather bag with me, with a moist dishcloth. I whap it in there. As soon as I take it out, if you remember two things about this, if you make your downward cut below the bud first, like so, and then make the corresponding cut above the bud, very often quite good to use your knife as a measure, just because you get a little bit of distance either side of the bud, yeah? But do your downward one first because it acts like a stopper. And then above the bud, slide down behind the back of the bud. And then you've got a little handle. I don't know how to do it now, actually. You've got a little handle that you can then hold. Because the cambion, there we are. The cambion, basically I've done that terrible, haven't I? So I'm brushing it on the thing. But the cambion, which you can see in this, can you see that? The bright green just underneath the bark, that's the living part of the tree, if you like. You want to be joining that with something very similar here. And you'll just literally make a similar cut on your rootstock by measuring it, using your knife, and then slotting it in. Having cut the stopper cut, as well as helping it stop, it also allows you to slide it in, and it sits quite nicely. And then you can add that bud, and you can see that. You would then normally take it up. You can buy fancy tape like parafilm, but equally good is a ripped up carrier bag. Back in the day, they would have done it. If you're late summer pruning because you followed my advice and you decided you're going to be late summer pruning later rather than earlier, some of this woody material will be quite stiff. So you can then remember what they used to do in the old days and have some raffia. I always have raffia in my bag because if it's a bit stiff and the grafting tape or the ripped up carrier bag that you're using isn't quite holding the cambion from the bud and the cambion that you've revealed from your little rootstock, it's not holding it together properly, it won't join. So a little bit of raffia, dipped in water, soaked in water, and then you could apply this over the top of the grafting tape or whatever else you've used. The only top tip to remember there, though, is unlike the grafting tape or even the carrier bag, that will give some stretch. This won't really stretch very well. So as soon as you're convinced that it's, or you're happy, usually about 3 weeks later with a bud graft, you'll know pretty much whether it's established. Take this off because it will restrict it, and then you can leave it. If it looks like it's still dormant, it doesn't mean it hasn't taken. You might just have to wait till the spring. But labeling is the biggest failure in bud grafting. Not reminding ourselves. Label the pot, label the rootstock, label the bud that you put. I sometimes use coloured insulation tape, and not insulation tape, masking tape, the paper stuff, just to remind myself of what everything is. And I have a very clean surface area. So there's a little bit of extra while you are out summer pruning. You could do a bit of bud grafting. The end.
Brilliant, thanks, Joey. We haven't got any questions in the chat, but if anybody has anybody got any questions that they'd like to ask about summer pruning, or just an issue that you've got with your own orchard, something that you've wondered what to do about, some trees that you've planted in the last few years?
I'd like to ask one of
Brian Heath. Excellent, thank you. Yes, go on, Brian.
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant, Jerry. Focusing all
Hi,
that
Brian.
detail. And a question, please. Well, two. Do you approach tip-bearing apples differently from those that are not tip-bearing? And what about triploid pollinators?
Oh God, there's a lot to answer there. If for community groups, I tend to encourage them to avoid tip bearers. It makes it a lot simpler. And for a lot of summer pruning, you wouldn't be using tip bearers anyway. you would deliberately be selecting a spare bearer. So it wouldn't be that much of an issue. What did you ask about triploids? What was the question about triploids, Brian? Sorry.
Jerry, do you approach triploid pollinators differently?
Well, triploids don't do the return service. Let's back up for those of you who are not familiar with the genetics of things. So the triploids with the extra chromosome, you might ask why we ever plant them. It means that they don't pollinate anything else. Although mistakenly, actually, even on the RHS site, it says you need 3 trees to pollinate a triploid. It's not strictly true, is it? The triploid won't pollinate anything else, but need pollinating itself. So actually, if you had a triploid, such as a Bramley seedling, and something like a red Falstaff, for instance, then that would be fine, because the red Falstaff is self-fertile, one of the few self-fertile trees, which means it will pollinate itself. It will also pollinate, is it group 3? Yeah, but overlap a little bit. But if you've got 2 things in the same pollination group, one of them is self-fertile, it'll pollinate itself and the triploid. Why would we grow triploids if they're such a pain in the proverbial? Well, they tend to also have other qualities. That extra chromosome actually does us other favours. They're prone to giganticism. They tend to produce some of our larger apples, hence Bramley. They're vigorous, which is quite good. The only other thing I would say where I've had to deal with, other than that, deal with a triploid differently, so not talking about pollination, in terms of pruning, which is what today is that if you've got it in a row of cordons and you've got some triploids in the mix, they probably will be more vigorous than the other trees in your set of cordons. So a cordons is where you might have a post and wires, and you'll have a series of obliquely planted trees all in a row like this. Oh, I thought Brian was just going to show me his own orchard there, or someone's just come on my screen. If you've got that, if you've made the clever decision early on when you planted it to attach your trees to the canes and the canes to your wires, then, which they used to do in Victorian times, then you've got an option to move your tree around a little bit, and something that's a little bit more vigorous you can change the angle. Then, if most of them are 45, you can knock your triploid down a bit. You'll probably need to. So if you really want a triploid in a say series of trees planted in cordon form, you probably want to leave a little bit of space either side in case for knocking down. Otherwise, you may well be, if you're using it too tight, if your planting distances are too tight, you will invariably be pushing one tree into another. So you allow for a bit of space. If I was doing that, but they're great trees, triploids. Don't, just because they don't pollinate other apples even in their own group, it's not a reason to reject them. It's because they are, as I say, they tend to be larger apples, and some of the late season ones are really good keepers as well. The keeping qualities of apples actually in decision making is one of the most underlooked and underrated things that people obsess about. Pollination groups, but as long as you're planting about 6 or 7 trees and they're mostly suited to your climate, they're probably going to be, if they're Welsh, in groups 3 or 2 anyway, maybe a few 4s in terms of pollination groups. Much more important actually is when they're cropping, because that's when you have to deal with them, process them. And thankfully, Sarah's having a one of the talks is going to be about processing, I think, later on in the year in this forum. It's really important. If you're busy in or if you're a school, classically, if you're a school and you've got a load of trees that are cropping very early, and because of climate change, that's a little bit earlier. So if you've got a September apple that's cropping at the end of August now, the kids are going to come back to a wasp factory rather than lovely red apples. So it's something to really think about a lot more when you're designing your own orchards. But don't avoid triploids; they're all right.
Jerry, Dan has got his hand up. Dan, do you want to ask a question? And then we'll go to there's got 3 questions in the chat as well. Dan?
Yes.
I've got a question. Well, hello, Dan.
Sorry. I'm struggling with signal here, to be honest.
Oh, yeah.
Hello. I've got a lot of experience with tree care, but not so much. And I'm wondering, people notice much difference between trees they improve and the trees they just kind of let do their thing and not in terms of their results. Just I'm from other trees that you generally just leave alone and you touch
Dan,
different orchard trees.
Dan, Dan, we really can't hear you. Do you want to pop your question in the chat?
Yes.
I think is probably best. Thank you. Thanks very
Yeah.
much. So while you're writing your question out, Christopher Evans is asking how much new growth do you reduce on a youngish tree typically? And also, is it best to leave removing or treating canker to winter pruning?
Oh, I should have brought a pen, shouldn't I? So I could write down 2 parts to that question. What was part 1?
Part 1 was Chris. Do you want to ask
Oh,
these
how
questions
much?
yourself?
How much do I remove? For
Yeah.
young trees, none. So that's an easy percentage, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't take any off my young trees. If they're younger than 4, I want every single bit of sap that they've got to go back into the lower base of the tree and into the root system, because I don't want to lose any of it. That's my battery power, isn't it, for next year? So I tend to not be, unless something's damaged. And we're talking about apples and pears now, are we? If we are, then I will remove
apples. Yeah.
I won't be removing anything for the first 4 years in summer. I won't be touching them.
Okay.
No, I'll probably leave it to the winter, because I want that sap. Once it's grown, I want that sap to then drain back in the winter and to power the growth in the spring. So I don't tend to move anything. The second part of your question was canker. I prefer to remove disease in the winter unless it's absolutely bloody obvious. And the reason for that is you won't be surprised. Well, you should, if you've been keeping trees for a few years, you'll soon realize that some things look terrible in the 1 year and then they're fine the next year. Some things that are actually, some scorch from an overly sunny week and untimely watering can actually look a bit like fungal attack. So I don't tend to make a lot of decisions about that. It's better you see whether it's died off in the winter, much better. So I don't tend to do a lot about disease control unless for apples, certainly and certainly not for canker.
Okay. Can I just ask? Our orchard, the trees are planted 4 meters apart, 3.6 in the rows, and 4.5, I think, across, and they're a bit close together, I think, in hindsight. So they've all grown like stink. They've grown really well.
What rootstocks are they on?
Various. We've got a few. The biggest ones are crab apples. They go tall and doing and they're there
on their own roots. You mean crab apples?
Well, there's about 4 or 5 crab apples there just to sort of help the others, and the others are mixed. There's cider apples. There's desserts, cookers. There's all different types in there.
They're the varieties, but what about the rootstocks that they're on?
I think they're M. I'd have to go and look up the labels, but I think they're M16. I think
M26 maybe.
Oh, M26. Some of them. I mean, they're typically around about. They've been there 10 years.
About 10 foot or something like that. 12 foot?
Yeah, they are. Yeah, and they tend to put on quite a bit of top growth because of them being quite close together and with woodland on 3 sides.
And are you growing them as open centres or central leaders?
I think we're trying to achieve open centres now, but there's like about 140 of them, and all the people that helped me plant them have disappeared. So it's a job to get around.
It's often the way with this is why keeping things simple with community. It's certainly very important. Don't overcomplicate it. Most of the summer stuff, I'll be doing some stuff with groups literally 3 times a week now. It's maintenance actually is way more important at this time of year. Dragging a load of undergrowth, getting them mulched in this heat, give them a good water and then mulch them, ideally with some kind of mulch mat, but it doesn't have to be, if I do big installations for wealthy individuals or just people who've got some cash, we might be using coir mulch mats, but
Yeah, I've got some of those.
Tesco cardboard or anything else, co-op we've got here. So I get a lot of co-op cardboard or from a bicycle shop. It's way more important than getting out there, but it is important to get out there. Those planting distances, yeah. And this makes pruning hard, actually, because if you plant, nearly all the books are in fantasy land when it comes to planting distances. They're all wrong.
Yeah,
They're all wrong.
I looked
don't
up
know
a
why.
book.
It's not rocket science. But if you were really hard pruning in the commercial orchard, you get away with that. And you might get away with that in certain circumstances with a single leader, where you're creating effectively a pyramid shape. But for most people who have gone for open centres, you do need that extra bit of room. And semi-vigorous, if you imagine rootstocks producing very small trees around about, 5 foot or person size, 6 foot. And then if we call semi-vigorous in the middle, round about 12 to 15. And then we've got the larger, what we used to call traditional rootstocks. And for apples, that's BM25 and M111, sorry. A lot of garden centres will have tried to sell you one of, in the semi-vigorous bit in the middle, they will have tried to sell you M26 or M106. Now, I don't like 26, although it's offered everywhere. They're very easy to reproduce, which is why people sell them. Not because they're the best, but because they're easy and cheap. That's not a good enough reason, in my view. If you've got a choice in the matter, I would use 116. It's better. It's between the two. 26 is the anchor's not quite good enough. It's okay for small gardens, but it doesn't really any kind of exposure, and it can drop. It can fall over when it gets bigger. M106 is better, but it can get collar rot, and it can have some root problems. And I just I live in wet Wales, for goodness sake. By and large, you'll probably be all right with 106, but I don't like it. And there seems to be no point in getting a 106 if you can get 116, because that doesn't get collar rot. It's much better. It's a slightly smaller tree. It's a little bit bigger than 26 and a little bit smaller than 106. It is genuinely about 12 foot. If you've got any experience of growing 106s, you'll know that they never grow 12 foot. They're more like 15 or sometimes 18.
Yeah.
They take over. And if you planted them at 4 meter distances, they're going to be touching.
Yeah, they are.
If you're growing organically, like I do, and like I'm sure a lot of us do here, space is really important. We've just been talking about summer pruning, creating space and airflow around our trees. Why ruin it with a planting distance that doesn't do the same? You're looking at a minimum of 5 meters, and if you can go a little bit more, that's fine. It looks weird when you plant a stick in the ground and they're 5 meters apart, but it really does pay off. I often make people visit orchards where they've got 106s actually, and they're planted 5 meters. Actually, some of them are 10 meters apart, and there's still, very little light on the orchard floor in some parts. Remember, you're running a workforce when you grow an orchard. All your pollinators and all your beneficial predators, they all work for you. You need to sort them out. They can't live on 2 months or 1 month sometimes of orchard flowering. They need other things as well. So you'll have loads of cool things flowering in your orchard sides, and ideally on your orchard floor that will flower right through the year, because these guys need to eat at other times of the year. They also quite like to drink, so a pond's quite useful. If you're looking after them and you're wanting flowers that will help these guys that are flowering at different times of the year in both shade and sunshine. Very often with some of these orchards, you haven't got any bloody sunshine on the orchard floor because everything's too densely planted. A minimum of 5, and for those other guys, a minimum of 10, really. Although I constantly talk to people planting them narrower, but I just think, what's the point?
Thank you. Yeah, luckily we've got a couple of avenues.
Sorry, a correction for you though. Yeah, sorry, I'll end on. If you've done that though, it's not the end of the world. You just might have to rethink your shapes. You can get a narrower shape through, like, the single leader pyramid shape, and that's quite common in library orchards. So you might, if they're still young, it might be worth thinking about that. And one option is, if you've started off with an open center, is if you think about a single leader as a series of decreasing in size open centers, That's probably an easier way for most people to think when they're pruning it. And you'll have, it's like a candelabra, isn't it? Or you know, I can't remember the word now, chandelier. So you'll have a larger one at the base, but then you'll get narrower as you get up. But you'll have to keep this bottom layer a little bit tighter than you would have done normally.
Okay, thank you.
Just in the interest of answering a few more questions, I'm just going to
Thank
move
you.
you on, if you don't mind. Dan's question was related, actually. So he says, trying to improve tree spacing, and he doesn't have the experience to know if some pruning is good. Are people finding prune trees are much more productive? What would you say, Joey? Do your trees get more
What the
productive
question
if you
was?
prune them?
Is it more? They're way more
Can you
productive
see the chat?
prune them.
If you have a look at the chat, you'll be able to read it.
Well, that might be difficult on an iPad. I can answer the question from what you told me, though. They are more productive if you prune them. Remember, it's Malus domestica. It's a domesticated variant of sylvestris, isn't it? So it's not a wild tree anymore. We've domesticated it. So we've already intervened. So it's not that surprising, really, that creating a regime. But it doesn't have to be as mad. The pruning regimes don't have to be as complicated as some would have you believe. Summer should really be about whizzing around, taking out a lot of the new growth, and the only time you count, 3 buds, 2 or 3, whichever's a nice downward facing one, rip out the rest with an established tree. That's quite simple. And again, these shapes, they're not that hard to maintain. And then all you do is filling the vertical and horizontal spaces with laterals and sublaterals. When you get to a smaller point where branches are joining, you're obviously going down to, well, you're only about fruiting spurs at that point, aren't you? So you probably would do 1 to 2 buds. But really, you can whiz around a tree relatively quickly and then crack on with the rest of your work. If some years you don't prune, it isn't the end of the world, but you just won't get as you won't. If you don't summer prune, your existing fruit, if it's quite dense in terms of foliage, won't get as ripe, won't be as sweet. For cookers, it doesn't matter so much because obviously they're not making sugar. For crab apples, and actually I would argue for plums as well. Plums tend to do all right anyway. We're not, by and large, anyone who actually keeps an orchard will tell you. I'm sure people who teach it say other things, and I sometimes do say a little bit different. But actually, when you're managing things and you're busy, the plums are the last on my list. As long as they're all looking healthy, I'll leave them alone. I don't want to introduce any disease to them by cutting. So there probably is an occasion there with the stone fruit when I kind of less is more, definitely, with stone fruit.
Charles has got a damson related question when we're talking about stone fruit. He's got some.
Yum.
Charles, do you want to ask this question yourself? It's kind of nice to hear from people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure.
Hello, Charles.
Thanks. Hi. So we're planting on a common which is quite exposed with a lot of bracken around. We planted 20 damsons, I suppose, January 2023. Some of them were quite tall when they went in. They were probably 5 foot tall when they arrived with us. They're now really quite dense. They might have, I don't know, let's say 20 shoots off them growing very vigorously. Should I be looking to thin them out so that they don't get wind damage? I mean, I'm a bit worried that there's so much on top that the roots aren't going to sort of develop as much, won't develop as much yet to take the exposure.
God, I'd have to see where you are, but I think I might know who you are, Charles. I think
we've met.
Yeah. So damsons. So Charles has got quite an exposed site on is it fair to describe it as communal land? What it is, right. You've as a community taken it on. Damsons are often a very good choice for exposed places because they're tough as old boots. They're the plum for the difficult site, aren't they? Really, but apart from Merryweather, which is almost like in fact, people thought it was a plum for a while. It's so bloody gorgeous. And I love Merryweather. You'll probably have a load of other things like Farley and you might even have some Shropshire prune. Yep. They are quite hedgy trees and they do get quite thick. So there's 2 issues with that. Do you care? Because we're really going to pick around the edges. Anything surviving in environment where you put it, it's going to be good. But you can, well, there are lots of things you can do. Obviously, if you reduce the exposure with hedging, which isn't going to be an issue, you can't do. Obviously, yours are planted in exposed places. There's never going to be a hedge, and that's the way it is. Yeah, you could hollow some of them out. You could actually hollow some of them out.
Even as young as
ideally in
1 or 2
July.
years old.
Yeah, you could do that. Was the only time you would? Yeah, a little bit more vigorous, a little bit more tough. It becomes more of a chin stroking exercise as they get older. This is why we take that chance. We're trying to capitalize on some of that growth. July would have been better, probably, or maybe even June, because you're quite south of Wales.
Yep.
So there's a little bit of a risk now. Yeah, if it was mine, I was looking at it, I was thinking, oh,
Sorry, what's the risk? What's the risk now, Jerry?
The risk is, as I said before, a silverleaf.
Oh, does it come like the further you get on in the season? Is it just in the exposed cut that it will?
It's prevalent across winter and into late winter and spring, and then starts to come back again in the autumn. So it's an issue that you want to avoid, but it's like a balance of risks. You go, with an older tree, you might just leave it. But with a youngster, 2 years old, were they 2 years old when you got them as well, Charles?
Yeah, I would say they're 2-year-old when we got them.
2-year-old trees, and they've been in a year.
They've been a year and a half now. Yeah.
Yeah, if you went out and did it now, well, the sooner you do it, the better. Have a look at them, and if it's obvious that there's 1 or 2 branches that if you just snipped out, would put a lot more light and airflow into the tree, and it probably will be the case, unless they're on. I know it's not always the case because I've got a load of damsons on my land and in my barn in pots now, and they're all single leaders actually, and very densely. They're hedges, but you could reduce the laterals along some of them. Certainly, any new growth, take it back to about, around about 9 inches. Mm-hmm. See if you can just get a bit of airflow. The other thing, of course, in an exposed site is that with a young tree, and I know you've staked them well.
Yeah, they're staked, but only one stake, fairly low down.
It's pros and cons, isn't it? Again, it's like shades of grey. It actually could be a sail for the wind. So reducing it can also get less buffeting. If you've planted trees like that, it's usually a good idea to have done. I really don't approve of straight stakes anymore. In most situations, very rarely do I do that now. So in the old days, we'd have a straight stake on a tree. But actually, in Charles's thing, if you've got if you've got a 45-degree angle, and I say 45-degree angle, don't write that. Well, you can write it down, but it's ish. You can't always get 45 degrees in the soil. It might be thin, it might be rocky. That'll do.
That's what we've got.
Aim for it.
Yeah, we got
a third up. I think we talked through this, didn't we, Charles?
Yeah.
And then with a decent strap, that'll hold that steady and allow this to buffet a bit.
Yeah.
Encouraging to root down, but still taking a little bit off the sail might be beneficial anyway. But you could do that also by taking some of the weight off as well, by taking out the centre. If it has got a main stem and you'd like an open centre, because they are easier to pick, you could take that down halfway. It's difficult to advise you without seeing it, but
Jerry,
you could be quite tough on it.
Can we take one more question?
Yeah.
Is that okay? Thanks, Charles. Angharad, are you there? Are you there, Angharad? Maybe Angharad's walked away from her laptop.
Do you remember what Angharad's question was?
Yes, I do. It's what do you use to clean tools, and have you got any tips for dealing with blossom wilts?
Oh dear. Yeah. The only problem with blossom wilt is you just take it out and take it away, really. In terms of cleaning tools, a lot of these fungal problems that we can get in summer and spring, if you're not using nasty chemicals, really what you're doing is trying to take away the chances of it sporing the following year. So taking away any diseased material, not into your compost bin, put it in a back bag and send it off to the tip, really. Unless you have a bonfire. I don't tend to have garden bonfires. but you could do that. But get it off site, really. Cleaning, everyone asked me about that. And I remember on one training course, people were taking photographs of my cleaning fluid. It was just the cheapest one I could find. Back in the old days of during COVID, everyone had these lovely little vials of alcohol on them, like we were all experimental chemists. And I used to use that to clean my tools, actually, because it was readily available. But anything really, I have a dry rag generally in my bag, and I have, well, this is Dettol, an antibacterial surface cleaner. It was the cheapest one they had. It's just more important to clean them. I mean, even if you were just using, I've ran out in my own orchard before, and I needed to complete something, and I've just used whatever I had, including leaves, but just cleaning them, getting all the material off. It's good. It's good biosecurity, good hygiene. Your tools
And
should
when
be
you
clean
say
anyway.
when you say with blossom wilts to take the material away, do you mean like prune it off and take it away, or do you mean that tree is
prune
there?
it off, take it away, clean your tools.
Brilliant, thank you. I'd really like to finish on time because everybody has got other things that they need to get to doing. So thank you so much, Joey. That was really fascinating. Thanks everybody.
If you
You're on mute, Sarah.
Just before you all go, I'd like to share my screen just to share this nice little resource we've got on our website. We've got loads of paper copies. Get in touch if you'd like some copies for your. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
So if you just go on our website and put orchard in this search, that'll come up. But like I say, I've got a couple of boxes. So if anybody would like a load of those, really happy to send them out if you send me a stamped envelope. So yeah, thanks again everybody for coming. Thank you, Joey, so much. That was really
Hey, you're very
interesting.
welcome. And if you want a list of, I've got a list of tools I can send to you, Sarah, and you can send it around to people who want it. Just my recommended tool.
Oh yeah, okay, great. That'd be fab. I will send that to everybody, and I'll also send you all an invite to the next event, which will be about holding juicing days, community events in your orchard, in your community orchard. Thanks again. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
So cheers, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.